Jessica Donegan, and I'm back for part 2 of Frank Herbert's Dune 2020 review. In the first part of this review, we went ahead and we talked about the genre Dune is in, the overall story structure of Dune, and the characters of Dune. And as promised, I'm back for part 2, where we're going to discuss the world building, the themes and philosophy in Dune, the plot line, and why I'm still really excited for the now 2021 release of Dune the movie, even though I wasn't so fond of the book. Before you can go ahead and dive into this review without seeing part 1, but if any of those areas of the book and my thoughts on them interest you, the genre, the structure, or the characters, you are going to want to go ahead and pop in and take a look at part 1 first. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead, pause right here, open a new window, check it out, and come back to me. I'll still be here. Are they gone? For everyone else, welcome to part 2. And just as a quick review, I think Dune is an incredibly well-written, well-developed book that I disliked reading entirely. And I think that's fair. I think you can acknowledge a book's strengths and things it's doing well, and at the same time realize it just wasn't for you. Like, if Dune was for you, if you have overwhelmingly positive things to say about Dune, I want to hear your opinion too, so let me know in the comments, and tell me more about what I was missing out on or what I didn't value enough within the book. Or, if you disagree with what I have to say, let me know about that too. Or if you agree, I would love some support here. I did a lot of research looking for other people who didn't like Dune before I did this video. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of people who vocally dislike this book, which is fine, but it did make me feel a little bit like I was a crazy outsider. So let me know if that's not the case in the comments below. Alright, so diving right into part 4 of this overall evaluation of Dune, we're going to talk about world building. And it's probably the first section I have nothing negative to say about. I have a very strong sense of place. Anytime we're in Dune, I know about the different cultures, the different things that they like and they dislike. I have a mental picture of what these people look like, why these cultures exist, how they came into being. Sometimes I have a couple of questions. For example, the Doctor has a big diamond tattoo on his forehead, which relates to him being conditioned, and that's why he's always loyal. And we don't really explore what condition means or why the diamond tattoo is a thing. Like, does the diamond tattoo just mark him, or is that why he should always be loyal? And, since the conditioning fails in this case, I guess I'd want to know more about what it is and why it's never failed before. So there are definitely questions within the world, but that's sort of to me a sign of good world building, that I, number one, believed that was a thing, and then that I had follow-up questions or that there was more I wanted to know. And Dune 2 is a series, so there being questions isn't actually the end of the world. It justifies why a series might continue. The other thing I love about the world building is that we just dive straight into it. I know I complained about the epigraphs and exposition, which I think you could totally get rid of, and part of the reason I think you could get rid of it is the rest of Dune's world building is so strong. We started with chapter 1, and it wasn't like a long chapter about backstory or history. It was a chapter where we started right away with a Bene Gesserit trial for Paul. And we didn't really know that much about the Bene Gesserits, we didn't know about their tradition, we didn't know about this box. The story just sort of is going, and you have to come up with these own ideas on your own. You have to fill in the blanks. And I love that kind of storytelling. I love when you don't explain it too much, and I have to kind of do some work as a reader to figure it out on my own. And I think Dune does this really well. So overall, the world building is excellent. It all makes sense, it feels like a cohesive world, and they don't spend a lot of time just dumping exposition on me or explaining words or concepts that are unfamiliar. I get to see them in action, and I can draw my own conclusions from that. So this was really great, and people who recommended Dune to me because I like strong world building, and I specifically like it when there's not a lot of exposition, you are right. Dune does that. Unfortunately, there are other things about the book that appeal less to me, but if you were looking for a book that was doing world building well, Dune would be a go-to, especially in a science fiction or fantasy scenario. If you want to see execution that's really great, in world building specifically, Dune would be a good choice. Alright, and another element in Dune that we would explore is going to be the philosophy or themes of the books. Dune is a philosophy theme-heavy book. It has 770 pages, so there's a lot of time to explore multiple themes, and Dune really revels in doing that. Something I want to note is if I had read Dune as a teenager, we'd probably have an entirely different review. It would probably be a 5-star glowing review. I really like philosophy. I really love reoccurring themes. I even like when authors hammer them. One of my favorite classic books is The Scarlet Letter. And if you want to talk about symbolism and themes, that's pretty much all that's happening in The Scarlet Letter. And it's the same idea hammered again and again. So none of that necessarily detracts from my reading experience. But one thing I will say about it is the kind of audience you need for that is pretty specific. It has to be for someone who likes philosophy and who likes reoccurring themes and symbolism, which I'm one of them, but it also has to be someone who hasn't been overexposed to the philosophy or the themes that the writer wants to talk about. And through no fault of Dune's own, I have a lot of exposure to the themes that it wants us to explore. So again, as a teen, I wouldn't have had that kind of experience. And because I wouldn't have had that level of exposure, this would have been one of my first takes, it would have been really meaningful to me. It would have meant a lot, and I would have really enjoyed it. And my lack of experience as a teen would have helped me overlook some of the flaws in presentation as well. And to be fair to Dune, it was one of the first books that explored a lot of these themes. I just happened to read many of the books and viewed many of the movies and shows that were inspired from Dune before I read this book. And because they had a strong basis to build off from this book, they were able to tackle those themes and ideas in a more meaningful way. Obviously, the other books had a more modern take that I could appreciate more. So even though Dune deserves credit, and in that way I should celebrate it, it can be hard to as a reader since I've already seen something better. And I do want to dive into some specific themes of Dune too, and whether or not it executes them well. So to me, the first question that Dune asks is, what does it mean to be human? Again, right away in the first chapter, Paul is given a test by Lady Jessica's trainer from the Bene Gesserit. She puts a poison needle up to his neck and makes him put his hand in a box. And the box delivers extreme nerve pain. And the whole point is for Paul to keep his hand in the box, and if he doesn't, then she kills Paul. And the reason that this test is administered is because whether or not you're human is determined by how you handle pain. An animal, they chew their hand off to escape a trap. A human endures pain primarily. A human endures pain, they make plans, and they get around it. So if you're able to endure pain for a larger goal, then you're human. And if you are not able to endure it, or if your first idea is to escape, then you're no longer human. It is interesting that we discuss what it means to be human. That's always an interesting concept. I think this execution is clunky at best. Nowadays, we know that there are several major ways to deal with painful, traumatic, or extreme situations. There's fight, there's flight, there's freeze, and there's fawn. Those are the 4 major ways that we know of right now for humans to react. And whether you fight or flight is valid. And freezing, sitting there and enduring and waiting for your moment, that's also valid. Fawning, which is similar to Stockholm Syndrome, but not entirely the same, and I don't want to get into too much of it because it's a newer one, and I'm not sure I entirely understand it. But sympathizing with your captor or whoever is doing harm to you and looking to help them and humanize yourself in that way, hoping to eventually gain an upper hand or get them to stop just because they sympathize with you, is another way to go. But like this only one way to be human, I think, fails. And I think exploring your humanity only in terms of pain is also a major failure, because what it takes to be human is more than just how you act under extreme duress. Certainly that can be a defining moment, but it's not the only thing that does or doesn't make you human. Whether or not you put other people under extreme duress, I think, is a worthwhile thing to consider on what makes you human. Whether or not those flaws are inherently human to start, and this whole conversation is a moot point, is also interesting. But those aren't the kind of things we tackle here. In this particular story, we are talking about how people handle pain, and if you handle it the wrong way, you're no longer human. So I'm not into that. There's a recurring theme about fear being a mind killer. It's a cool mantra. I don't know that it's anything more than that. It feels a lot like stoner talk to me. Again, this was written in the 60s, and like a certain level of drug trippiness and self-awareness is part of what this book will hold for you. Your tolerance for that is going to really define whether or not this book works for you or not. And I don't have a super high tolerance for this drug trippiness. And things like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, where the drug trip is the whole point, I'm more tolerant of it because I'm interested in that. But using the trip for, meditation, or for higher power, or whatever it is that is going on here in Dune is not really my thing. I think it's been done a lot. Maybe when Dune came out, it hadn't been done so often. So maybe that, again, is a point to its credit that I can't appreciate. But especially now, I just think that if you're looking for that transcending via drugs or transcending via meditation, there is a lot of better books and shows that explore that. And this felt really basic, and it felt like it hadn't earned that from me. Another thing that goes on here is the obvious relation between spice and oil. And that still holds up today. In fact, it holds up better today than it did when this book first came out. And I think these elements that hold up even better or are more relevant is part of why Dune is so popular. And I have nothing to say about the oil and spice comparison. I think that's great. It works very well. I don't think it makes any points that I hadn't already thought of or that I hadn't already known about, but it is a series of points that I enjoy. So from that perspective, I was like, all right, this is a thing that's happening, and I enjoy this thing. And pretty much all the elements about the workers being badly treated, about the workers valuing the spice over their own lives, about the danger it takes for this thing, about how rich people are just getting richer off of this and poor people have no access to it, about how in a way our reliance on oil is almost addictive in the way that spice is addictive. These are all really valuable points. They're great insights. It's not anything new to me personally, but it could have been new at the time, and it's still worth saying, even when it's not new to me or new to a lot of people. And sometimes it's just fun to be preaching to the choir, or in this case being the choir listening to the preacher. I enjoy the comparisons that you can make between spice and oil, and I'll give that a happy check mark. Another thing that is an ongoing theme is how the different houses or empires can be compared. Probably at the time, the goal was to compare them to globalization, to different powerhouses in the world, and how they control things in a way that's not for the people's good and that's not really in their control. I have seen some people say that now you could make those empires comparison to corporations here in the US specifically, and I see that. I can see how you would draw those comparisons and how you might find some valuable life lessons in them. At the same time, I don't necessarily agree. I don't think that humanity is at a state of helplessness in the same way that Dune is. Maybe that's the optimist in me. And I don't think that corporations or even world leaders have the same kind of control that is expressed within Dune's empire narrative. Also, I already said this, but I do not like feudal systems. I don't like reading about them. I don't agree with most of the comparisons that people make between old feudal systems and modern times. I don't agree that it's a system that would exist in the future. Sure, there were good and bad things about the feudal system, and we could argue about that for a little while if we wanted to get into the actual history versus the high fantasy view, or in this case, the sci-fi view of them. But I don't think that this comparison, romanticization, exaggeration of the feudal system in this way actually contributes anything to the dialogue about what's going on now. And I could be wrong, but I'm not seeing it. I feel like it's really tired and overdone. I feel like even when Dune was first written, this was incredibly overdone. And some of it probably ties in to Frank Herbert's affection for the monomyth and Joseph Campbell's work. If you listen to any of his own interviews or him talking about Dune, one of the many things he says is that he wanted to contribute to the hero myth when he created this. He wanted something that followed traditional mythic structure, King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table. I don't know why he wanted to do that in a sci-fi setting. I don't think it works. Or it doesn't work for me at all. Probably some of that has to do with my minimal tolerance of that genre to start, even in a fantasy setting or in a historic setting. The whole monomyth idea to me doesn't really work. I don't agree with the hero's journey as a universal theme, and I think it leads to uninspired works. To me, the system of government that was set up to mirror mythic structure, or inspired from mythic structure, or however you want to phrase it, is just one more way that the hero's journey and the idea of the monomyth fails the storyteller. And I don't think there's a lot thematically or philosophically to be gained from it. Moving forward, we also have to talk about the fact that Paul is a messiah figure, and within this story specifically, you could argue that he is a white savior. Now, I know that Duke Leto, his father, is described as having olive skin, so technically Paul, you might be able to argue that Paul is not white technically, but he is holding all of the regular contraptions of white privilege, which in effect in this story makes him white. And he does become a messiah / savior figure for a bunch of people a bunch of desert dwellers, the Fremen in this case, and the Fremen are obviously taken from Arabic and Islamic cultures, so they're non-white people for certain as well. And they're also a minority people. They're looked down on. There's significant xenophobia against them. I don't like the Messiah myth in general. I don't like it in Lord of the Rings, and I don't like it in Narnia, and I don't like it here in Dune. I'm an equal opportunity, no Messiah, whether or not you bring any racism into it, storyteller. Don't want it. I'm pretty tired of the Chosen One myth in general, whether or not they're like a magically superpowered person or not. It gets worse when they're magically superpowered, and in Paul's case, he's probably one of the worst offenders of this. He has all the information he needs whenever he needs it. He's just super awesome for no reason. He manages to fit himself into like everything everyone was ever waiting for, and some of that is other people manipulating what they were looking for, like the Bene Gesserit. They leave a bunch of ambiguous myths that people can later capitalize on. In this case, Paul was able to capitalize on them. Or, again, the Bene Gesserit were trying to breed a very specific kind of person with specific set of abilities, and Paul is the product of this breeding. And the Mentax as well, it's a very formalized way to train people, and Paul was receiving that training. So all of these parts come together to make him super awesome. So I can't say that he's super awesome without justification, but it doesn't, from the reader's perspective, it does feel that way a lot, because we're told about this. We're told that he has Bene Gesserit training. We're told that they were specifically breeding for certain characteristics and a certain outcome. We're told that he has this Mentac training. We're told about these myths and how Paul fits these myths, so he can just kind of step into a role that someone else, like, created. We're told these things, but we don't see them. It wasn't believable. It wasn't something I felt in my bones or I understood in an intrinsic level. It just felt like this entirely unearned thing. And this is the problem with a lot of Messiah themes in books. They find all kinds of reasons to justify it, but it comes off as just lacking to the reader. I didn't go on a journey with Paul. I don't understand why he is the way he is, and it feels like he's just that way for plot convenience. Or he's that way because Herbert wanted to make these kind of philosophical points. So I didn't care for that, and it didn't land for me. Likewise, I know there's a lot of debate about whether or not Paul is a white savior. From my viewpoint, he is. And I've heard a lot of arguments. I looked up many different arguments for and against this point. I haven't seen any arguments that are strong in the against, except that there are other cases in literature where it's more obvious. Seems really weak argument to me. If you have another argument why Paul isn't a white savior, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm open to having conversation about it. I'm not necessarily open to discussing whether or not it's damaging. It's part of our literary past, and there are stories that are good in spite of this, but we have to acknowledge when to improve in storytelling now. We have to acknowledge when overstepping happened in the past and how it happened, so that we can avoid it in the future. And in this case, I don't know, it would have been really cool to have an almost all Fremen story. And instead, we have a story where the Fremen definitely are the good people in this story, and they're definitely a heart and soul in this story that otherwise just doesn't exist. But they don't get to be their own heroes. So I think a lot of these elements combine to make an unpleasant experience for me as a reader, because I don't like the idea of a monomyth. I don't enjoy the hero's journey. I don't like someone with supercharged abilities that I haven't struggled with them to earn. And I don't like the implications of a white messiah. And it's brought up a lot. There's no way of avoiding it in the story, since Paul is the main character, and these premonitions, this idea of terrible purpose, this is all part of the narrative that we're weaving and leading into. It's my understanding that in later books they twist this a little bit, but I'm just reading this first book, and from this first book I have no desire to read another book. And that's something you should think about as a series in general. Like, is your first book so distasteful that no one wants to read your next book? Even if you take all those things that are distasteful and work them into something meaningful in the next book, you've got to give me something to get me to that next point. And I'm just not getting that from Dune. I know a lot of the things I'm complaining about are a product of their time, and also a lot of the things I'm complaining about being done or being executed better. When Dune was the first, that wasn't the case. But if we're talking about this book as something that still holds up, as something that you still recommend to people, and not as a case study of the first time it was done, or as a tribute to the origins of a lot of tropes and ideas within science fiction and fantasy, just like purely on the quality and enjoyment level, then Dune isn't holding its weight anymore. That's just something that we have to face. And maybe we is just me. And that's fine. I'd love to know about where you stand with this. Why do you recommend Dune? Is it because you truly love and enjoy the story? Do you really revel in the philosophy and themes here? Do you find it executed well? And what specifically about it did you enjoy or did you find good execution in? You know, except for the one spice for oil theme, I don't think there are a lot of themes in philosophy that I found compelling in it personally. But I would love to hear why it moved you. I'd love to know more about it. And the last element of Dune that we have to talk about is the plot. The plot definitely holds a back seat to other elements of the story. I think if I were going to weight what Herbert valued when he wrote Dune, he probably wanted to talk about a bunch of different philosophies and themes. He was probably deeply invested in the world building. And from that world building, he created some dynamic and interesting characters. What suffers from this execution, from my perspective, is the plot. I think the plot is the weakest part of this book, and I think both fans and detractors would agree that it's the weakest part. Now, it's not bad by any means. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and there's a clear narrative with acceptable execution. I think the problem with it is it's just acceptable. As far as pacing in the plot goes, the internal monologue really slows everything down and holds back your ability to build tension or get invested in a moment because you're never going with a moment. You're always slowing it down, bringing it back to an internal thought process or to an idea or a higher goal, which can be interesting in a philosophy and themes part, but 100% derails any kind of plot movement. And it can also be interesting in a character perspective, but it doesn't help drive plot. Again, with the epigraphs, there's these little bits of history to help with the world building. There's these little tidbits that help give further insights into characters, and it helps to explain what is important within the Dune universe, because it's what people focus on in history helps you understand what their morals and values are, right? So it gives you all of those juicy elements, but what it doesn't do is drive a plot. And in some ways it ruins certain aspects of the plot because sometimes the epigraph gives away something we're about to find out. So it takes away tension in that way, and it just further removes the reader from what's going on in the book right now. Other than that, another thing that I think doesn't help the plot is that Frank Herbert was overly invested in this cloak and dagger negotiation thing. And I love puzzles, I love complex plans, and I love when people sit around the table and try to work things out with their words or with some kind of peace treaty negotiation. And personally, I enjoyed a lot of aspects of that within Dune. But one of the things that suffers is we'll hear the entire sabotage plot in chapter 2, and then we're watching it slowly play out over the course of the next 8 chapters. That was very frustrating for me. We could have left a lot of the roundtable meetings in, we could have left the negotiations, the treaties, in the I suspect this or I suspect that element. But when people actually gave away their plots and then we just watched the plot pretty much exactly play out, I didn't like it. I think it was to hammer in, that this person is really smart, or this person's really talented, or this person's very crafty. And even though these other people are smart and crafty and suspicious, they just can't measure up to, whoever came up with the idea. Or maybe it was to give a sense of inevitability. There's definitely a free will versus predetermined destiny going on here within Dune, and maybe this was a lean into that. It's another philosophical element I have literally no interest in. I don't care about free will versus predestined at all. It's not a conversation I care about. And it's not a conversation I've cared about having since I was 18. So it's been a really long time since I've found anything compelling or new about that. And having that conversation in this way doesn't build tension. It doesn't create a sense of stakes. Like, I never thought like, oh no, I'm really worried for Paul, or what will happen to Lady Jessica? I was never concerned like that for any of the characters. There was never any personal interactions or story beats that worried me or made me concerned. Again, some of this comes from the Epigraphs, because I knew certain things had to happen. And the story wasn't happening in a way that I was enjoying the journey. I think I've spent most of this video talking about the things I didn't like in this journey. So while overall the plot exists and is done competently, which is more than I can say for some books I've read, it doesn't stand out. It doesn't make me excited. And in some ways, it actually detracts from itself because of other aspects that it executes on. So these are all the core things I didn't enjoy about Dune. I could go on and on about different things I didn't like, and I could probably come up with quite a few more elements of the story that were executed well too. But I think I hit everything essential that I want to talk about that leads me to disliking this book, even though I'd recommend it to some readers. So some of you might be wondering, if I didn't like the book, then why am I still so excited for the movie to come out? And my answer to that is going to be Lord of the Rings. I also don't care for Lord of the Rings as a book. And I enjoy the movies. I could go back and forth about what specifically I do and don't like about those books and movies. But the general takeaway is I couldn't even finish the first book in Lord of the Rings, even listening to it on audiobook. So it scores even lower than Dune. But I really enjoy the movies. They're a little long, and there are definitely parts, I've seen it so many times, there are definitely parts that I speed through now. But I still like them. I love that epic world that it feels like you can step into and live in for a little while. And I love the buzz and the popularity that came with Lord of the Rings. When Lord of the Rings came out, it was just this huge, incredible wave of success. And there were so many different parts of it that people were talking about. They were talking about the comparison between the books and the movies. They were talking about how the movie was filmed in a 3-year process instead of each time for a sequel. They were talking about the location. They were talking about the set builds. They were talking about the different costumes. They were talking about different inspirations for the characters, how they adapted them, why they adapted them that way, how different actors embodied those, much loved and cherished characters. And it was a huge phenomenon, and it got a lot of people talking about fantasy. It kind of gave a resurgence to the fantasy genre when it came out. And it showed people that large spanning fantasy could be adult and exciting and a financial success. And it led to a whole bunch of different other experiments in the fantasy genre, commercially and independently. And I'm hoping for the same thing for Dune. Some of the things that don't work in Dune as a movie, or in Dune as a book, you cannot do as a movie. You can't do all that internal monologuing. You probably can't include all those epigraphs. So a lot of the things that I hate about Dune and that bog it down, I know are not going to be in the movie. And there are a lot of opportunities for incredible visual moments in Dune. And, if Dune is a success, the way Lord of the Rings is, then I'm going to get all kinds of different interesting meta information about how Dune was produced, how those actors were chosen, how they embody those characters. I want to hear all about the costuming and set design. I'm hoping for there to be some practical effects because I prefer them to CGI, and I love to hear about practical effects. There's all these other little avenues besides just seeing the movie that speak to me. And again, if Dune is a financial success, then we're going to see a more willingness to invest in epic stories, science fiction stories, moving forward for Hollywood, for mainstream authors, and for independent authors. And it's going to give us more opportunity to experiment and play in those realms. And even though I don't necessarily enjoy Dune, I love those realms. I love things that have come off of Dune. I love things inspired by Dune. And I want to see more of that. I want to have more conversations with people about it. And I'm excited about those elements specifically going into the movie. And I think I might like the movie in the same way that I like Lord of the Rings, despite the book not being good. Or the book not being to my taste, I should say. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to in Dune the movie. That's how I felt about Dune the book. Did you like this video? Did you find it informative? Did it agree with your opinions or disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you're looking for more like this, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Give me a thumbs up. Let me know if this is the kind of content you're looking for. And other than that, I hope you all are having a great day, and I'll talk to you next time.